Hello and welcome to the plenary session of the conference titled Future Best Practice. We're here to talk about what it takes for councils to be high performing and award winners, how they share and develop best practice and future practice, the lessons learned, and to look to the future and how to navigate the challenges ahead and the stepping stones that can be used for future success. And I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Andrew, the Chief Exec of iESE, and our multiple award-winning speakers. And each person here today, their authority has won more than 7 awards. So over more than 13 years, they have repeatedly won awards and been celebrated for what they're doing in developing best practice. And it's an incredible achievement. And what we're going to ask them to talk about is how they have managed to keep that momentum going, how they have managed to keep their organisations firmly placed on the side of success. So I'm joined by Craig MacArthur, Director of Health and Social Care, East Ayrshire Council. I'm joined by Arthur Shanovia, Chief Exec, Babbage and Mid Suffolk. I'm joined by Councillor Denise Turner-Stewart, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Communities and Community Safety, Surrey County Council. And we're joined virtually by Dave Hayward, Chief Exec, South Staffordshire District Council. Welcome to you all. And I'm going to start this plenary session by asking each of you to outline what you think has made you successful, what you think has contributed to your ability to continue to make awards. We'll circle through, if you could take 5-6 minutes to do that, but it's really about getting to what makes your organisation successful. What do you think contributes to it? So, starting with you, Craig.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I guess in 5 or 6 minutes it's going to be quite tight, but there's a few areas I think that we'll all probably want to talk about in terms of what makes a council function and what makes us good is how we maybe just interpret that. So, for us, governance sits at the heart of all that we do, and it has to be there. Governance is really important. And I think in terms of what makes us good and how we can continue to improve around about that is making sure we've got really good, solid political support. And over recent years, that's been around about consensus politics. We've had a really good relationship across the council and the ability to get really difficult decisions through on a consensus basis because it's the right thing to do and it's the right thing for our communities. So I think that whole perspective is really important for us. I suppose in terms of governance as well, is making sure if we are doing things differently, if we are pushing the boundaries, we can take our inspection and regulatory colleagues with us as well. So when Audit Scotland, as it is for us in Scotland, comes along to do those inspections, we can convince them that we are doing things in a different way and actually change that narrative and push some of those boundaries as well, just to ensure that we actually get recognised for the good work that we're doing. And that whole aspect of best value and how we deliver services differently is something that we've been really successful in having that conversation with our audit and inspection colleagues. Another part of the governance for us is the support we get from our corporate teams. So I think in some places the corporate teams are almost seen as a barrier. Sometimes it's the corporate teams are seen as saying no. We're very much the opposite, where the corporate teams are seen as enablers to success and to how we want to change and transform and take some of those sort of big programmes forward. So that enabling process is really, really important for us as well. And I suppose the bit that sits right at the top of all of that is our strategies. And I heard in one of the previous sessions talking about how you actually align some of those strategies. So we've a community plan that's a 15-year plan. All our community planning partners signed up to it. So that's the council, health board, police, fire, local colleges, etc. all signed up to the same set of priorities over a 15-year period. Drilling down, that then sort of feeds down into a strategic plan for the council and a really low level down into community-led action plans across all of our communities, and actually translating all of those really big priorities down into the lowest level, which is within communities, again, allows us to really deliver that in a very, very local basis. And it's about keeping it simple, so it's not making it dead complex, it's actually having something that communities and the community leaders can actually buy into and understand and take forward as well. So in terms of the governance, I think it's not rigid, it's really flexible, and it's very much about taking communities along with us as well. I suppose from governance, we've then got some of the challenges around about funding, and that is becoming increasingly challenging as we go forward. So my background is as an accountant, so I've sat on the other side of the fence telling people what to do around about this, and I'm now on the side where I'm trying to push back and say, no, we need to be innovative, we need to use reserves in a really clever way, and we need to start to do some of these sort of spend to save type initiatives, and really, again, pushing the boundaries there. I've been a bit facetious because when I was in that other seat, we did allow that to happen, and I think that's some of the infrastructure and environment that breeds success as well, just giving the people the flexibility and the comfort to know they can do things that wee bit differently. And as I say, we've seen some really good examples, particularly within health and social care, of initiatives where we've used non-recurring money to do something really quite interesting. And on the back of that, we've seen some really big savings being generated, but more importantly, some really good outcomes for our communities and for individual people as well. So the bit about funding is really important as well. But again, very much about flexibility. So as I probably see the theme emerging here, it's that the flexibility, I think, is what makes, I think, us sort of stand out just that wee bit differently as well. The final two bits I wanted just to touch on was around about people and partnerships. So the people who work within the councils, very much empowered and trusted to do what they need to do. Do the right thing is one of the mottos you hear people repeating all the time. Taking risk is good. Support people to take risk in a really calculated and clever way, but absolutely supported people by doing that will make mistakes, and they need to know that we have their back to challenge, to push the boundaries, to make mistakes but learn from it, as long as we know they're doing it for the right reasons. So that the whole culture and environment round about that is absolutely critical to us, and we've undertaken a big piece of that sort of culture change over the last probably 3 or 4 years now, which we call the FACE principles. So within the council, FACE stood for flexible, approaching, caring and empowered, and we had a whole range of culture change work built round about that just to really embed that across the whole workforce. So those sessions were delivered to over 6,000 people, just to really embed that across the whole council area, and it's been incredibly successful. And the final point, as I said there, is about partnership. So I think we recognise as a council or as a health and social care partnership, we can't do this ourselves. It's very much about doing it with our communities and with those other agencies who are quite often better placed and better at doing those particular things than us. We have a really strong third sector within East Ayrshire, and we rely and push quite heavily on them to deliver services on our behalf. And our roles changing, so we're more of a facilitator. So for something we know they can do and do better, then we let them do it. We'll fund them to do it, we'll support them to do it, but we very much empower those third sector and other agencies to go and deliver that for us because we know they're the right people to do it. So I suppose in summary for me, it's about doing the right thing. It's understanding or trying to see what does good look like, and that's changing. We know that what was good 3 years ago is different now, it'll be different in 4 or 5 years' time. Funding sits at the heart of that, so as the funding pressures become tighter, good starts to look different. So that whole improvement journey, the performance measures that we chase all the time will change. So maybe a well-performing council in the future won't be one that's getting better all the time, but somebody that's actually managing to stand still while everybody else is failing, to use your own words at the start, John, as well. So but I think it's that, what does good look like will change. I think we can't move away from that. Just need to recognise that some of those challenges and a lot of that conversation at the political level will be really difficult because our politicians want to see us getting better and want to see those improvements all the time, but that's becoming increasingly difficult. But that's okay, and it's just being able to identify opportunities to push through and do that differently. And the bit for us that sits right at the heart of all of these things is self-evaluation, self-awareness, understanding where we are, what we're doing, so that if somebody does come along, if we get an external auditor or an inspector coming along, there's no surprises in there. We know where we're good, we know where we're bad, and we know those opportunities to improve. And at every step of the way, we've always got plans in place to do better and to do more. So the bit about self-evaluation and having not a really complex framework, again, back to the first point, keep it simple, but just understanding where we're doing well, where we can do better, and just making sure that we always do the best by our communities and our residents.
Brilliant. Arthur?
I was going to start by saying I was going to try and not repeat anything Craig said, but I'm going to fail dismally. So
common points
a lot of commonality there. And going back to your sort of principle at the start in terms of being successful councils, I think one of the main ways of retaining that success is by not focusing on being successful. So being humble, recognising that we get just as much wrong as we get right, but it's about how we identify that. So governance absolutely important, having that openness and ability to be able to say we're not getting this quite right, and then being prepared to tackle it accordingly. So for me, it's all about culture. All the different strands come back to culture, setting that framework out from the outset so that all of our staff, so we're two authorities, but only about 550 staff between the two. So being very clear, what is it we're ultimately trying to achieve? You're not a planner, you're not a housing officer. Yes, you are technically, but what are we actually trying to achieve? And what are the values and behaviours that underpin that? And that's absolutely critical, particularly around behaviours and recruiting people on that basis, less their professional skill, more in terms of what do they bring to that unit, to that partnership, to those relationships. And similarly recognising that we won't have the answers to everything. It's not right that the councils look inward to try and find the solutions to everything. It's about how do we engage with our partners, critically with the communities. They know the patch even more than we do. They live there. And so how can we come up with collective solutions to the problems that we face, preferably before things go wrong, but particularly when things have gone wrong. And in recent times in particular, it feels to me as though we found ourselves dealing with the crisis at the end of our nose. And they've just kept on coming, and it feels like they're going to just keep on coming. And the important thing for us as local government is not to be totally absorbed by that. Clearly, we can't ignore a cost of living crisis. Clearly, we can't ignore something like COVID. Yes, we need to react and respond, and local government is fantastic at doing that. But our success, to my mind, is not stemming from that. Our success is being able to simultaneously look over the horizon. What's coming next? What does local government need to look like in 10 years' time? Not just how it is now, and not just because of the consequence of whatever the Chancellor announces tomorrow, but more generally in terms of what does local government, successful local government, look like, and how does it engage with its communities? How does it work with its partners? And so one of those elements, as I said, is about having that vision, having that collective vision with our communities and our partners. Another is about the values, but the third for me, and we've shifted to some extent, yes, we have indicators, yes, we have metrics, yes, we have performance measures, and the governance is important, particularly to identify those challenges. But for me, it's about outcomes. So it's focused on what difference are we making? Because we could be hitting all the green targets we want, but if it's not really making a difference to our communities, or worse still, it's having a negative effect, well, then let's change it. And so having that culture whereby, as Craig was saying, I actively encourage our staff to make mistakes. That's how people learn. That's how we change stuff. Otherwise, we're just turning the handle and doing things the same way we always have done. And that's easy for me to say. Unfortunately, and I don't know if it is a good thing, fortunately, don't make that many mistakes. And I think that's wrong. I think we should be being prepared to keep pushing, striving, not massive financial ones preferably, but still keep pushing and striving to encourage the environment whereby people are able to break a few eggs to be able to make proper change. Because otherwise, we will fail. We'll fail because we'll go bust. Or we'll fail because we won't be having the impact that we need to have for our communities. And that is very localised in terms of what our local community needs, which will be different up and down the country. So what local government looks like also needs to remain flexible to recognise that we're a reflection of what needs to happen in our place, not necessarily what Whitehall would like to see happening generically across the whole of the piece.
Fantastic. Denise?
Thank you. So in Surrey, we have a relentless focus on delivering for our residents. Our mantra is very much delivery, delivery, delivery. We undertook a very extensive exercise some years ago where we literally consulted on a comprehensively widespread basis to fully understand the needs of our residents, our businesses, our communities. It was a completely exhaustive exercise, really, so that we could then form our priorities, which would then drive our activities and our initiatives and our strategies going forward. Those priorities, tackling health inequalities, working for a greener future, empowering our communities, and building a thriving economy, have been the bedrock, really, of all of the work that we've been doing. And they form very much the sort of structure that we can work collaboratively with our partners collectively to deliver against those very relevant priorities for our residents. So it's a question of, it's not just repetition, but it's making sure that those priorities are known throughout the organisation. They're fully identifiable by all of our partners through our comms. I think you can never underestimate the power of communications. You can repeat messages constantly, but you can always do better. So we've had an absolutely relentless focus on our communications through a number of different channels. Social media today is such a prevailing influence on people's beliefs and activities and behaviours, and it's recognising that through those channels you can really positively harness the power of the resources within our communities, because we have been, again, relentlessly focused on engaging with our communities and making sure that their resilience, which they have in abundance, is able to be harnessed and channeled. So we've got funding, we've got numerous funding opportunities to enable our communities to be able to come forward with their own projects and create that self-reliance within their communities. We're tackling health inequalities. Our collaboration with our health partners and health integration has been an absolute focus. The wider determinants of health, looking at housing, looking at access to nature. You know, Surrey is a very rich county, rich in resource, rich in experience, rich in environment. So making sure that all of our residents are able to access through public transport, to not be denied the opportunity to enhance their lives through those rich ingredients that we have in Surrey at our disposal. And as I say, our no one left behind mantra has really driven our relentless determination to fully understand our communities through exhaustive data analytics, through analysis, through very targeted interventions. When you're working with a population of 1.2 million people, it's really important to really get into those pockets of communities that are struggling, are more deprived. We've got community link officers that can go in and tackle those inequalities in a really kind of localised and informal basis to really kind of to challenge that perception perhaps of local authorities being there to kind of manage and organise and control, actually to support and to nurture and to nourish our residents. So I think culturally, Surrey County Council is a very compassionate and empathetic local authority. I've been a county councillor on and off since 2005 at Surrey, so I've really seen, a sort of an evolution really of the culture at Surrey and driving those values and those qualities through and working with our staff to make sure that they're embraced by all of our staff throughout all of like people represented here, very, very sort of numerous and broad range of services, very different services, but having that common aspiration, that common ambition, and again, leadership, I think, has been key. I think you were talking about what is that sort of magic dust, that ingredient. I think if I was to look at Surrey County Council, I would say from the leadership, there's an impatience, there's a requirement for pace, not at the expense of delivery and quality, but of a sense of recognising a sense of urgency, given obviously some of the issues challenging us, like housing, for example, where we really need to move quickly to catch up with the demands that are being placed upon us, and also horizon scanning and looking at all of those issues, that are presenting themselves both now and in the future to be able to prepare ourselves to adapt and focusing on our core business, which is delivering those essential, high quality, essential services, which primarily support the most vulnerable, to make sure that everybody is supported in Surrey, and our partners are fully supportive of that approach as well.
Thank you. Dave, last but not least.
Yes, I think for me what the discussion has demonstrated that there are a number of elements to delivering a good council, and for me it's about getting the basics right, and Craig already touched on, it's about keeping it simple, and I think it isn't overcomplicating things, creating the culture that you want across the organisation. So for me the starting point is or was about creating the right environment, and so that internal focus and how it translates externally into and throughout the communities we serve, and so setting out that clear focus, clear direction, good consistent communications, and the timely messaging, and I think for me as chief executive, it's about setting the energy and the pace that's right for the organisation. And it's important that you understand the organisation, know what you can and can't do, and that was really important for me. And certainly, I'm sure colleagues would agree, and it's already been flagged up, the political importance. It's the relationship with the politicians, but in particular the leader of the council. It's about that understanding, and if you don't get that right balance, it becomes a very difficult environment to manage. So that relationship is so important with the leader. I think it's about being consistent in everything you do. Once you've set your stall out, once the direction has been set, and ultimately about providing a platform to enable individuals and the council to excel as a whole. Something I introduced within the first few weeks of becoming chief executive was introducing a set of 5 values that I'd always worked to as an officer, but had the opportunity to set them as across the organisation. And they were around trust, positive relationships, listening to people, transparency, and pride. So really people focused. And they have become the drivers behind how we work, how we shape our recruitment, how we develop staff, how we retain staff. We live and breathe them. And the 2 values I really lean towards are positive relationships and trust. And that those 2 values have really shaped how we work. That collective leadership, not one person, recognizing not one person has all the answers. It is that collective ownership, but it's creating the right environment to do that. So you've got that network of conversations, which Arthur touched on, from your top team cascading throughout the organisation. So you're learning, you're bouncing ideas off one another. And once you've got that working well across the organisation, running parallel is how you translate that internal culture outwardly across the districts with other organisations and into the communities. And again, similar to Denise, our mantra is who's best placed to deliver. And our leader's been absolutely clear and not allowed the politics to get in the way. So it gives the authority to the officers to get on and do the job at hand. So I think being a good council is about getting the internal mechanisms right, but also looking outwardly too, recognising that wider community leadership role. We're not always the best organisation to lead. We're in a fantastic position to facilitate and to support what happens in the community. Sometimes that's leading, other times that's the facilitating role. We operate within South Staffordshire a locality model. We operate 24 different services as a district council. We have a commercial focus that nets us around about £3 or £4 million a year that supports the ongoing delivery of those services. But equally important is our wider community leadership role. And in South Staffordshire, we have a stronger 3-tier working model. We've got 27 parish councils, obviously the district council and county council, and our locality model has broken the district into 5 areas. So all our data and all our intelligence is broken into those areas. We have taken a collective approach to dealing with some of those local issues based on the data, recognising it's all about our people, it's about the communities, not services per se, and not where we sit. And it's about that conversation. We hold 3-tier member locality forums. So you've got district members, parish members, county council members. Some of them are twin-hatted, some of them are triple-hatted, but coming together in one forum to share their experiences and look at how we can work together. We've shared resource. We've got locality enablers across the district. They're employed by the district council, but they're the eyes and the ears of what's happening on the ground, and they bring it back into the organisations and pass it on to the teams and really develop the relationships with the parish councils. And just one quick example, a recent piece of localised work. The county council identified an additional £50,000 for environmental work across key entry points in the district. As a district council, we provided the resource and the time to carry out that work. The parish council identified the areas to focus on. So it's a really good, simple example of strong three-tier local government working. It's not perfect, and it's that ongoing breaking down how we work, but we're starting to really make a difference. And those principles work and are translated across the wider partnership arena with the police, with the health, with the fire, but also we've developed that wider community locality work with our business community. So we've set up 5 business community hubs within existing business environments across the 5 localities. So we link in the communities, we link in the wider partnership work within that. So for me, it's always about keeping things simple. It's the people, it's the relationships, and trust that you develop the right environment. You provide that culture to ensure individuals and the organisations collectively grow. And when you start talking about wicked issues, you're in a far better, stronger position to be able to tackle those.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Dave. I'm going to turn to Andrew and say, Andrew, you've presided over years of awards. You've seen these people win their awards. What do you think has been special ingredients, special characteristics? You've heard what they're saying today. How does that play back to you?
It certainly resonates. I mean, I think that for me, we're in a very lucky position of being able to go out and see and work with councils across not just the UK, but worldwide. And I think the common thing when you go in and you first start to have a discussion around what are you doing, there are authorities that all sit down and say, this is our staff numbers, these are our budgets, this is what we do, this is the money we've got to save next year. And then there are others that sit you down and go, these are our communities, this is what their needs are, this is where they are going, and they don't even get to how we're going to respond and what our budgets are until they've got all the way through that. So for me, mission number one, if the mission is our vibrant community, our not leave anyone behind, that laser-like focus, how they do it then will change agilely, rapidly, because they're constantly looking for things that will make their community better, more vibrant, etc. And then I think the 2 critical success factors, and they've come out in the comments really, culture. They manage staff by behaviours, and there's a culture. You can cut the authority through a stick of rock, no matter who you speak to. When you go around the authority, whether it's out in parks and leisure, whether it's inside social services, they are all part of a whole organism. They're all part of a one team, and they have a culture, and they have that understanding of their community that leads them. You can touch it and feel it. It really is. I think it's amazing. And then the other thing then is actually the communities are part of the team. Actually, it's really difficult to see the edge of the authority. Actually, the community and the officers and the members are all one team, and all serving the community at the heart of it. So those to me are at the core of it all, and you can see that. And when we look for that in other countries, actually, we see pretty much a similar thing. So it's not just UK. Any public service body, those critical success factors will be there.
So if I opened it up to all of you, but it's budget that's most important. If you're going to overspend, that's the crisis right there. If you haven't got the money, that's the crisis right there. Well, that must be it. That's the secret. We just need to look at the balance sheet. Surely. Said an accountant.
Go to the accountant first.
So I'll go first. So yes, the money is important. I don't think anybody will ever hide away from it. But I think what we've seen is that rather than taking decisions purely on a budgetary basis, I think what we found is by doing the right thing, typically that outcome will follow. So if you do the right thing, if you make the right decisions, if you're actually focusing on doing it in a specific way, the right way, then the money will naturally follow. Because I think what we see in a lot of the systems is there's waste in there, and actually by fixing that and doing things in a much more efficient way, in a better way, and delivering better outcomes for people, it naturally just becomes more cost effective. So yes, the budgets are important, But I think what we're really keen not to do, and have been really keen not to do for a number of years, is to take decisions purely on a budgetary basis. So it's not taking decisions just about money, but actually taking it because it's about better outcomes, and as I say, the money typically follows. One of our examples that we talk about, was at a conference yesterday, mentioned it as well, was a recent investment through the council in housing, so a housing model. 14, I think it was, one-bedded tenancies in a single supported accommodation for people with complex disabilities, complex needs, support packages. But by doing that, those 14 individuals are now getting a far better outcome. Their life has changed dramatically because of it. But the bit that follows on through all of that is that the new job I'm in now, in terms of the Health and Social Care Partnership, it's actually costing us £500,000 less a year to look after them, because you can put a very different package of care round about it to support everybody in that facility, rather than having 14 individual packages of care that's really, really expensive. That wasn't why we did it, but it's just naturally what almost kind of falls out of doing the right thing, is that the budget consequences follow.
So what do I put on my performance dashboard then if it isn't budget?
So I'll come back to the budget point if I can, which is absolutely budget's important. Can't ignore it. Would we like to have more money? Yes. Are we trying to find ways of earning more money to spend in our communities? Yes, of course we are. And we have to balance the books. We're good local government. We have to make sure we do that every year. But we don't want to get into the business of just rationing services, because what all of us have said is it's about impact for communities and outcomes and their futures. And if we're just rationing services, we're failing. And we'll lose more local government officers as a result, because they'll go and find something more interesting to do because it's not fulfilling. So we have to avoid that. And I also think there's a degree of psychological impact, in the sense that will we have less money next year from government than we had this year? Possibly. Is there lots and lots of money still in the system? Yeah, loads of it. So it's a systems thinking approach in your area that goes beyond my geography of my district, but more about what's the difference that we're making, combination of health, combination of police, county council, district council, towns and parishes. How can we use that money to best effect to prevent, because a lot of our funding, and particularly into other service areas, is going into failure. And if we can get upstream of that and be in the prevention space, then the whole bill for the country goes down as a result. It's not easy, but that's what we have to keep focused on.
So it's politically easy.
To me, to go back to the whole budgetary piece, absolutely essential to have financial stability, but it's recognising the opportunities and the capacity within our partners. So, for example, we allocate funding to a foundation that will then attract philanthropic donations to then maximise that funding, to be able to get more bang for your buck, essentially, and get that funding out into our communities, not just for the prevention agenda. It's much wider than that. It's life enhancing. So the impact of that funding can actually inspire, engage, attract volunteers, create more capacity within the communities, to then create that resilience, to then reduce demand pressures, to then free up our internal resources to be able to target those to the most vulnerable, make sure that we are absolutely equipped to have stable finances to be able to then ensure that the very best quality services are available for those people that need them the most. And then we're also encouraging independence and resilience within our communities, which is quite contagious and quite infectious, actually. We've all seen throughout COVID the wonderful initiatives. I mean, they're still coming through now. People just wanting to get involved, to work locally, to protect each other, to create networks, to be vaccinating or whatever, just to get that sense of community pride. They're all contributing, as you identified. We're all in this together. It's not necessarily a geographic sort of boundary that controls that activity. It's just people wanting to be doing their bit and to be sort of empowered to do that. So I think it's essential to have a stable and sustainable budget. But actually, I think we need to be far more creative and far more dynamic at recognising how you can create financing opportunities for other organisations or for our residents to come forward and actually start to deliver some of these services themselves, for themselves.
Dave, you've talked about 3 tiers of local government. Surely economies of scale and scope, you need to centralise, stop going into localities, centralise back into the centre, then you get a big blob, then it's much cheaper to run. That's the way forward. It seems how can you afford to go out to localities to be so spread out and still get all those benefits?
I think we've recently looked launched an initiative called Communities are the Best Medicine. And it's recognising the communities are best placed to support the infrastructure and to make things happen. And I think the infrastructure we've got around stronger three-tier working, it enables us to do far more than if it was all centralised in one place. It's recognising the strengths of the different the different organisations to do it. So it's about relationships. It's about building up the trust. And I think if we lose that, if we go to one sort of single organisation and pull away, you'll lose that. You'll lose that local identity. Communities know best, and I think we recognise that. And as a district council, it's that facilitating role. It's going back to the mantra of recognising who's best placed to deliver, and we're well placed to do that, and we facilitate that role. And you know, that example I gave in terms of the maintenance, the grounds maintenance work. You know, county council put £50,000 up, but you could probably double, if not triple, that in terms of the true cost with what the districts have contributed and the parish councils and those local community groups, because part of that is the Friends network, and we've got a number of Friends groups across the district which potentially could get lost. And I think the infrastructure that we've got in place enables that to excel. So it's Denise's point. It's about doing things different. It's ways of working. It allows that creativity.
So you've all talked about risk, and obviously the more partners you involve, the bigger the risk. But you've also talked about allowing people to take risks. So what does your risk register look like? Festooned with risks.
So we absolutely do have a risk register. I mean, we've probably got different layers of risk register. So we have, as a we'll have a strategic and a corporate risk register that identifies the big risk to the organisation, and those will be the same for everybody else in terms of levels of funding and public safety, public protection. So those big risks will still all be there. When you start to come down into the service level risk, that's where we start to see things a wee bit differently, because we are then working in partnership with people. We're actually delivering services in quite a different way. And you're right, that does present different types of risks. It doesn't mean it's a higher level of risk. I think it's a different type of risk. It needs to be managed in a different type of way. That doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means we need to understand what the risk is and manage it differently. So I don't think it means we're festooned with a significant number of additional risks. I wouldn't say that's the case at all. It's probably the risks take on a slightly different shape and form than what a traditional risk register might look like, and it requires us to manage it in a slightly different way. But that's just the nature of what we do, and we do manage it. And it's how we do it is maybe quite important as well, because even at the community planning level, there's a risk register there, and it's about partners taking ownership. So it's not a single organisation. It's actually looking at it across partners, across agencies, and taking some joint responsibility for identifying and managing those risks as well. So yes, it's different, but I don't think it makes it more risky than it would have been otherwise. It's just a different type of risk that we're managing.
So how do you create a culture that can allow people to take risks and potentially fail and still generate success?
I don't think those two things are polar opposite. I think they're the same. So it is, from a leadership perspective, it is exactly that in terms of making those points, in terms of expecting people to, or wanting people to actively go out and make mistakes. But that's not enough just saying that. You've got to back that up in terms of what they see and what their experience is. So if I say that and then the first time the mistake's made, somebody comes down on them hard and there's a disciplinary case, no, what's the learned behaviour? And local government is very good at learning to never do the thing that we did wrong previously. We need to stop that. We need to think of it more like how your phone updates itself and incremental improvements over a small period of time that you don't even necessarily notice. It's that approach to making mistakes. And as I say, actively encouraging. And it's a different workforce as well. So they're taking the point about risk. Operating in that more shared environment with collective leadership, with more collaboration, does mean that the slightly different skill sets that we need from our officers, from our councillors as well, which again is more organisationally blind, less technically in the old sense of, as I say, professional planner, professional lawyer, professional whatever, more about relationships, more about that governance control, but doing that together. But there is a counter to that, because certainly I'd say within our organisation, I think it's been part of our success, is if collaboration looks like, well, we'll only do it until everybody agrees, or when everybody agrees, well, that never happens. And so you end up doing nothing. And so instead, it's much more, we've got leadership of this place. Doesn't matter which bit of the system you are, we've got leadership of this place. If there's an issue that needs to be tackled, we're going to take ownership and tackle it. We'll take people with us. We're not going to leave you behind, but we're not going to wait for you either. And that really breeds real change then, and change for our communities in particular.
So does it feel more risky as you work with more partners and you have that relentless focus, and then you add pace? So you're trying to move faster, and you're using more partners to deliver?
I think it's about the structures that you have in place and the forums for those partners to convene and have accountability and transparency and communication, because without that kind of governance, you could potentially have initiatives running off and doing all sorts of things. It's about having a sort of structure around that. So I can certainly reflect on, as I say, we have our sort of priorities, and we have governance structures that sit underneath that, with those key representatives, with actions trackers and all sorts of monitoring mechanisms to make sure that there are outcomes, you've got delivery, and there are controls around that. But in terms of risk, I think policy can manage risk as well, because you've got examples like, for example, take a highways issue, street clutter. When previously you'd have had, well, you can't have this sign, you can't have that because there's too much risk from this sort of activity. I think sometimes you can have a pragmatic approach to something and actually use policy, renew policy and refresh policy to actually manage that risk in a sort of, you've got a reference point for it, but you can adapt to policy to manage the risk as public opinion, or as forums kind of reflect back to us as local authorities, that sometimes you don't just keep doing the same things because you're managing risk. I mean, obviously you've got statutory responsibilities for the fire service, for example, which is a very rigid risk management approach for absolutely the right reasons, but in other areas you can have a far more flexible approach, and I think it's just being cognizant of where you can be more flexible and where you absolutely have to be controlling that risk and managing it properly.
So Dave, if you were setting up a dashboard of making sure that you continue to be successful, what would you be monitoring? What would you be looking for?
I think in terms of a dashboard, I think it's the here and now. It's managing the risk, as it's already been pointed out. So we've actually got an active dashboard that we've recently updated. So a lot of it is focused around cost of living at the minute, and being mindful of the challenges we faced, but how can we flip some of those challenges into opportunities? And that dashboard enables us to have the conversation. And I think it's going back to Arthur's point. It's about creating the right environment. If you've got that environment right across the organisation, your dashboard, your performance model is a way of it is a tool to use, but it's the way you use it. So it's the conversation, and it's how you use the data and the intelligence. So going back to, so we've got a dashboard which is very internally focused, but also we've got that broader partnership arena where we're working with partners, and actually the data and the intel focuses always pushes us towards the same areas, and so it is about that conversation and just making sure then we're clear on the governance, we're clear how we're going to collectively work together on the challenges that are faced within our communities. But as I said, you can flip those challenges into opportunities and really start to think, be innovative, creative, look at how you can work within the communities by doing that. So I think there's various levels of how you manage risk.
So we've talked about culture being, it seems it's a very big issue, getting the environment right. So how do you create that culture? How have you created the culture that is doing this within your organisations. How do you go about influencing culture, maintaining that culture, reinforcing that, and indeed getting the right behaviours out of the staff that are working for you?
So I think as we embarked on our transformation journey a number of years ago, 3, 4, 5 probably years ago, we did consider really heavily and deeply round about what does culture look like, what should it be, and we engaged right across the whole workforce to understand what they felt about culture, what they felt a high-performing council of the future should look like. So that allowed us to then start to shape that cultural change that we wanted to see, but it was coming from the workforce. So they were telling us this is what we see as a council of the future looking like. So that almost predicated what that cultural shift had to then be. So then it becomes really easy when you then design a programme round about how you want to take forward that culture change, round about the face experience, as I mentioned before, which was that kind of immersive approach to actually embedding some of these new behaviours. When you're playing that back to people, it didn't come as a surprise because it started off with them telling us, so it was almost going full circle, which made it that bit easier, and we knew we were doing the right things because it's what people were telling us they seen in terms of those sort of key behaviours of the workforce of a future council. So it actually became quite easy by doing it that way around. Easier, nothing's ever easy, particularly when you've got a sizable workforce that goes, it's almost every profession you can imagine, from the yellow jacket people delivering services on the ground through to the professional staff, lawyers, accountants, etc., all with a slightly different view of the world. So trying to embed those common cultures across the whole workforce is challenging, but the fact that it was coming from the workforce did certainly make it a bit easier. How you maintain that, I think it's just about just rehearsing those values, making sure that we all live and breathe them from the top down. So the leadership style round about it is really, really important. And I think we've heard that before. If we're serious about telling people it's okay to make mistakes, we learn from it and we move on. We need to live and breathe that. We need to make sure that every day, if that is what we're telling people, then that's what we do. And you can apply that to any of these sort of behaviours and values that we're talking about. And I think that's certainly, from our perspective, we see that every day and right across the leadership team. And then as you go work your way down through the organisation, everybody just living and breathing those values. So that is just absolutely just about, once you've decided and that's the approach we're taking, it's just making sure that you live and breathe it every day and really do embed it within the organisation. And it's proven to be really successful.
For me, it's about recognising at the outset that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that you can't just simply click fingers, as much as I might want to as chief exec, click fingers and change the culture overnight. It takes time, it takes consistency. I'll come back to the point that Dave was making in terms of resisting that temptation as chief executive to look to the new shiny thing, or to feel the pressure that you're standing up in front of a bunch of staff and I need to say something different. Actually, it's about that consistency, that rhythm, and maintaining, but recognising in the best dashboard is what other people say to me. So it's what the staff say, it's what, when I'm sat in that town council and they won't pull their punches, what they'll say, group meetings with politicians, what they say. That's the proper sense check of what the real culture is as opposed to what we say it is, and then making sure that hopefully it's as close to what we say it is rather than necessarily. It doesn't mean you can't build on it. There's loads of small incremental ways that you can build, whether that's pulse surveys, whether that's revisiting the values, whether that's what you do in terms of staff awards, all those different ways of continually refreshing and building, but it is about that consistency across the piece. And then the concern for me is just making sure that, are we now embedding a culture that was the one we designed 5 years ago? Is that the right culture that we need in 5 years' time? So whilst being consistent, but having one eye on, actually, is it going to need a fundamental change?
And you've talked about the relentless focus you had at Surrey County Council, just continuously reinforcing what you've done. Has that been hard to maintain?
As I say, I think internal communications are as critical as external communications, and the sort of mission statement from the top down being cascaded down throughout the organisation, making sure that the environment is right for staff. I mean, you can get consultation fatigue with staff when you're constantly asking them questions. I've actually sort of worked for the local authority as well as been in this position, so I know what it is to be receiving lots of requests for feedback. And I think that engagement with staff really needs to be meaningful, and face-to-face is always good in the appropriate environment to just demonstrate that real commitment to wanting to have the best environment for staff, reacting to challenges, being able to tailor remuneration and reward packages to really to show that you're supporting those that most need to be supported. Having a really sort of strong commitment to absolutely recognising that you know, our staff are our greatest asset. So without our staff, we are not an organisation. So we have to be fully supportive. You know, supervision. You know, and there's very critical and challenging roles within local authorities that you need very strong support and very strong supervision to be able to perform those roles and to be supported, to be able to see your future career path, and that you've got, you know, a journey to be taking within that local authority as opposed to moving on somewhere else for a better offer or something. You know, absolutely seeing that you're valued, supported, the environment is right for you. Agile working, again, can really be a key component to creating that flexibility for the workforce to make them feel much more relaxed and rewarded and able to deliver to the best of their ability. So I think it's quite multifaceted, but it's a continuous determination to support and value staff, but also to expect to see those behaviours and attitudes reflected back consistently with the mission and the sort of morality of the organisation.
Andrew, iESE have invested heavily in culture as a key component. They've created the cultural compass, so it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was at a Solace event, and I think someone phrased it very well there, which was if culture change is kind of the issue, the thing that we want, actually management by behaviours is the solution. And I think where we start to move very, very differently to value behaviours over qualifications. Qualifications get you in the room. Behaviours are what keep you there. And actually taking those behaviours that are relevant, as Arthur said, to where you want to be, and actually embedding those in your policies, procedures and processes, valuing those above everything else, actually that does create significant change and can do it really quickly. So we've seen authorities change totally their culture over a 18-month period through a behavioural change programme, owned by the staff, owned by the members. But so yeah, it's incredibly important, and you can actually measure and manage behaviours. And actually, you know, if organisations have organisational terrorists amongst them, you know, and you can game the system if you're playing the professional card. You can't game the system if you're playing the behaviour card. And so we've certainly seen councils radically change their performance using that method. So absolutely, and it's something that I think we need to get better at as a sector.
We're coming down to our last few minutes. So what I would like to do, starting with you, Dave, is go round, and if there was one thing that contributes to success, the most important thing from each of your perspectives as we go round for one last round the table. So Dave, if you were advising, you know, what's the biggest contribution, the thing that can contribute to success, what would it be?
I think it's clearly setting out your focus, your direction, your vision and your values, and staying true to them, and continually sort of checking in and making sure that you are staying true to those values and your approach. And I think it's going back to my very first point, it's about getting the basics right. It's not complicated, however, it's relentless. Once you've set the direction, you've set the focus, it's just continually checking in, reflecting, and make sure as an organisation you're listening and moving forward.
Thank you. Craig?
So for me, I would say it's probably about partnership. I mean that in its broadest sense. So working in partnership with other agencies, statutory agencies, working in partnership with our elected members, so officers and elected members working closely together, working in partnership with our communities and third sectors who can deliver services locally. So to me, is recognising that as a council, we can't do everything. We can try, but I think to be successful and to do things really, really well, we need to lean heavily on others. So for me, it's very much about partnership working in its absolute broadest sense.
Arthur?
It's a mixture of things, I suppose. It's staying humble, staying ambitious, listening, as I know others have said, and telling stories, because that's the mechanism, and being storytellers ourselves, that's the mechanism that helps break down those barriers and enable the right conversations and the communication to happen.
Interesting. Denise?
I would say commitment. It's around never taking our eye off of our focus on delivering for our residents, but also never forgetting what it is to be a resident, to be one person in a huge population, to your day-to-day experiences, and just recognising what are the things that really make life easier for all of us, and obviously recognising all of those opportunities around us and making sure that we're harnessing all those opportunities and continually driving for delivery and being committed to that for our residents.
And I think from the clock, that brings us to our last 5 minutes. Andrew, we have summing up for the plenary and for the conference.
Yes, thank you. It's, I think, perhaps initially just to reflect on this session. I think standing back from it, there's clearly a lot of knowledge, and I think one of the things the sector's been good at is, I think over the years, is sharing that knowledge and actually being very generous with each other. And I think that those of us in the privileged position of actually going out need to get better at supporting that. You know, I mean, if you look at where councils have gone to, they've gone from thinking about lean and thinking about producing their services better. That was generations ago. That seems 100 years ago. We got into being much more customer centric and joining up our services around the customer. We've gone out into the communities and starting saying, how do we build from the community in? And if I compare that to where central government services have gone, I look at the simplicity of a single national service, and I'm going to put it online, or I'm going to, and it's just the kind of task that's been undertaken by the sector is huge. And so we've got events like this, and I think they are very valuable, and we publish, and that's very valuable. But we need to take some of the modern technology that councils are starting to use. You know, if you look behind what Dave's doing on data, what Surrey's doing on data, there's a level of sophistication that just did not exist even 5 years ago in what's done there. So, you know, for me, the next step for us is we want to work to build those models. You know, continuing today's conversation of what success looks like. And as you know, John, we've managed to worm our way in to get the use of an artificial intelligence research engine that does about a PhD's worth of research every 90 seconds. And by building those models, we can steal as many ideas as possible from around the world, which is essentially the definition of research. So the idea, I think, really for us as a sector now is that, you know, we just need to get much quicker, much more agile at taking some of those lessons and not necessarily implementing them as is, but adapting them for our local communities and implementing them in as cost-effective and low-risk way as possible, because you're absolutely right, you need to manage those risks, but the risk of not doing anything is even greater. So I think, you know, I think for me, the conference as a whole really has, you know, I said at the beginning, you know, if you'd picked any one of the dooms that we faced in the last 3 years, from war on European soil, global I mean, it's a litany. And councils have worked through that step by step. They've adapted, they've adopted new ways of working, and they've carried on. Absolutely phenomenal. And actually, within that, the good, the best have actually seen the long-term trends. So they're not just looking at how do we deal with the pandemic. They're thinking, actually, indoor air quality, as we heard earlier, you know, is a long-term thing. How do we adapt our internal environments? Outdoor air quality is an issue. You know, sensors in Camden, etc. So if you take each of those strands, they've not just reacted to the problem in front of their nose. They've said, there's a long-term trend here. Let's build that into where we're going. Let's help our communities adapt and thrive in those circumstances. And I guess we need to, in terms of taking the lessons forward from this conference, actually get better at actually sort of sharing that in a more easily consumable way. So as a sector as a whole, we can kind of improve. So hopefully, that means for our audience, you know, that you've picked up something very practical that you can use. There is an issue of Transform magazine which captures a lot of the conversations here coming out tomorrow or the day after in Municipal Journal. So that's a traditional publication. It's digital as well. If you want to connect to anybody that's been in any of the sessions, I know that everyone will be only too willing to share. And of course, we'll expect in return that you share what you're doing and contribute to the pot as well. So other than that, I think that in terms of the sort of the session today, that's enough from me, and probably over to you, John, to maybe thank our
I do want to
panel.
thank all the panel members for your contributions, your multiple award winners. You're doing magnificent work, and I do think you're exemplars for the industry. So thank you for your time and for your input. We are looking for nominations for the next awards, 2023. Though that's now open, so please do go to the website, do consider nominating yourselves for awards. We want to continue to use the award process and certificates of excellence process to find best practice wherever it is, and to make sure, one, it's recognised, and two, that people know about it so it can be shared. And that's essential, an essential part of what iESE do. So with that announcement, that brings us to the end of this segment and to the end of the conference. I thank everybody for watching. I thank our speakers for sharing their time with us. And I look forward to seeing you again at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you.
John.